Can you hear me? Are we
Yeah,
live?
yeah,
Okay.
we are.
We are back after a month um, away, after a month respite, back on the X Files podcast. This is Darren with Oleg. Greetings, brother.
Greetings. Thank you for inviting me again.
Of course, my pleasure. Today's topic, we wanted to do something that's pertinent to what's happening in a lot of different places. Uh, those things may be different for different reasons in those places, but generally the tactics and strategies remain the same. We're going to talk about riot and manifestation tactics and strategies today, how to stay safe um, from two perspectives, both around the manifestation or the riot or the protest or the strike, and being in the midst of it if you so choose to show up. Um, Oleg, you want to get the ball rolling? What do you want to do to start off?
Yeah, first of all, as usual, a short disclaimer that due to my service duties, I have been on both sides of the topic. Let us say so.
Mm-hmm. Fair
So
enough.
I would like to cover uh, or dance around the thing what just a common civilian should do who is not involved into that riot or strike or something else, who just wants to live his life more or less safely in those times. So again, I will not depict here government strategies, tactics, and protocols regarding it. So that guys who want to make a riot, please change the channel. On the other hand, I will not depict how these riots are organized and also the buttons they are using, especially some riots that have feeding, let us say so, from abroad. Mm, So please, guys from CIA, FSB, KGB, please change the channel as well. You already know all that stuff.
I think that can be, I mean, that's another topic entirely about propaganda and fear mongering, strategic placement of agents, um, uh, creating chaos in the midst of something that's totally different for the reason of creating chaos and distracting from the real messaging. I mean, we can go on and on about that. So I mean, let's decide. I mean, that can be another topic for another time. Let's decide to focus on the actual events themselves and how civilians or citizens would handle the different perspectives of those. I think we can agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
So here,
And
to
talking
open it
frankly,
up,
I'm
go ahead.
currently living. And talking frankly, this is unfortunately this is once again my life experience because I'm currently living in a country with where the political situation became very specific in a very short period of time.
Mhm.
So, as I mentioned before, I was on both the sides of the barricade, and now I'm a common citizen. So it's a third perspective.
Have you noticed that protests and riots and strikes and things along those lines have increased since, and without getting into details, since that destabilization has happened? Has there been an increase or not as of yet?
Mm, Well, partially I can agree, but we should take into consideration the exact country. For example, here the political situation has not been changed for 20 something years, and people really are annoyed with the current state of things. So they have some. So this situation that we have currently is more or less spontaneous.
Mhm.
I think I say more or less because, of course, there are some active groups of the guys who are sponsored from abroad, as usual. In these kind of situations in any country, there are such guys. But here it is more or less spontaneous. And we also should look at each and every separate country. For example, in Hong Kong, it was, again, it was not very spontaneous from my perspective.
It was a slow
But
burn.
yep, it was a slow burn, and so we should take into consideration the specifics. But yes, the amount of social disturbances have been increased lately.
Here, I don't know if you've been following it all, but we've had a lot of negative propaganda fed through the pipeline from countries that have animosity towards Costa Rica. I mean, Nicaragua and El Salvador specifically have planted false information, have claimed that we're doctoring the numbers here, have claimed that um, there are paramilitary groups moving around the country, have claimed that uh, we're in an absolutely chaotic free fall with the healthcare system such that it's not as of yet. And we also have a group of Nicaraguans that were trying to get home from Panama that crossed through Costa Rica to get home, and now they're not being allowed in after they were promised and granted accessibility. So, I mean, there are a lot of protests and public disturbances and social unrest for very different reasons. So, I mean, I think
Jumping on
that
the
to
tail a
be.
bit, I can relate to what you are saying
Mhm,
because our country is more or less in the same situation.
mhm,
I will not name what exact countries I'm talking about, but if you just have a look at a geographical map of our region, we have two neighbors. One of them is big and one of them is small.
mhm,
Uh, the smaller neighbor uh, is not very good at establishing their life because they were rioting and their rate of living there decreased significantly. So
mhm,
they are spreading false news about the possibility that our country will follow their way,
mhm.
like also decreasing and everything in trash. But of course, it is not true. And
Yeah, I.
our bigger neighbor spreads false news that sooner or later our country will be a part of that big neighbor,
Mhm,
just like just like some other regions. And it is also not true because basically we are living here much better without them than with them.
mhm. Yep,
So
point
yes,
taken.
can relate how the neighboring countries could spread false news.
But I think that's an element that needs addressing in the beginning is that we seem to, at least in North America, believe that a protest is a protest is a protest. And the entire dynamic and vibe that that protest gives off varies greatly depending on the reason for that protest. And here there are protests regularly for very diverse reasons.
Agree,
And the type of person that shows up to those protests is staunchly different. Um,
agree. Recently, there was a huge riot in Chile, if you
yeah,
followed it,
yeah,
and the cause of it was increasing of the ticket prices, nothing more.
yeah.
And they tried to,
The fines, you mean?
yeah, the fines and the prices as well,
Oh, okay.
because the Chileans told me.
Mm,
And factually, the government have been stabilizing the situation during 2 or 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So actually, even the smallest reason could be a reason for a riot or for a strike.
Hmm.
And if you are a common citizen, you should take that fact into consideration. That basically, however stable your country could seem, the strike could appear or the riot could appear at any moment.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, I mean,
the,
you know this region fairly well too, having lived here. So, I
yeah,
mean, political strife and coup d'etats and attempts at dictatorships are kind of rife throughout the region. And
mm,
that's actually one of the reasons why some of the other countries resent this one, because Costa Rica has a history of, compared to the rest, consistent stability. I mean,
yeah,
while they've had their warring
agreed,
factions on political ideas and idealism,
agreed, and
it has stayed fairly consistent.
yeah,
So, I mean, in an unstable region, that is actually puts a potential target on your back as well. So, I mean, throughout the region, throughout the pandemic, we've seen a lot of social unrest in different countries for very different reasons. The protest at the border is for the Nicaraguans to be granted access to their country, and their dictator is not allowing that to happen. Um, the protests within this country are quite polarized in that therefore preventing the Nicaraguans that are desperate for making money and accessing healthcare from a government who has complete apathy towards them, to prevent them from coming in and spreading the virus. Um, there's also social unrest here that's developing because the government doesn't have money, and they maybe whether it's a mistake or a transparency is up for debate. But when you make that announcement to your people that you're almost out of money and you can't afford to support any business whatsoever, um, it adds greater anxiety and stress. Now, when that economy isn't opening and you've just claimed that you can't help people, you can see that here the tensions and animosity is starting to rise as well. So the way it manifests itself is different than it would be in Nicaragua or Honduras, for instance, because traditionally Costa Ricans aren't that familiar with violence. So, I mean, that can be a positive as well here. But I mean, you're seeing strikes in Nicaragua from the medical people for the fact that their own government is downplaying the virus when they're overloaded. You're seeing it in Salvador because you have a leader that wants or is pushing for long term having a dictatorship, and he wants to throw his hammer down, and the people are resisting. In Chile, it was different. Uh, it was a semantics issue on raising the price of certain elements during a time when wages have plummeted. So I mean, the reason for the protest is a big thing too, and we don't often talk about that in North America because protests are protests are protests, right? And there can be a very different dynamic for each type of protest, and you have to know that going in. I'll add another point to get us going on a different point of conversation, but I'm going to give you the floor to respond to that, how it opposes to your experience and what you think of
actually, from my perspective, you depicted the main points quite correctly, but also you should always take into consideration the so-called, as I like to say, the human factor. That sometimes a social instability could happen just because it happens,
it. Yeah,
without any reason.
yep. That's always the wild card.
Yeah.
That leads me to the next point. I'd like, I'll state it, and you're welcome to jump in first if you'd like. Um, I think it should be established first, if you're not an active protester or somebody who is very socially or politically proactive, I think you need to establish with yourself what the reason for going to the protest or strike or potential riot is in the first place. what are you trying to accomplish by being there? And if the risk is potentially high, and I don't mean that it's, the idea is for violence, but that the potential for violence erupting mid-event is omnipresent, are there other ways to show that support in a more safe, risk-free manner? Why are you going there? What's your purpose? Another question I would ask is, are there multiple stages or locations where these protests are going to be taking place? And if one is going to be potentially more volatile than another one, can you pick a more safe and less threatening environment to still demonstrate whatever it is that you're wanting to support by being there, by having your presence felt? And I'll give that over to you now, what you think on that note.
Here, let me disagree.
Okay.
Because, well, of course, it is necessary to know the reasons and all that kind of stuff. But if the riots began already, our primary task is to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
And when we establish and uphold our safety, and only after that we can try to think over the overall political situation and how we can, for example, use it to our own good.
Mm-hmm. But on that note, let's go if you're okay with this, let's go to two different areas. How I often break this up when people ask for advice is into two parts. One is that there is a demonstration or a protest going on, and you happen to be on the periphery by chance, whether it's a sudden demonstration or protest or one that you had heard about on the news, either way. What are some precautions knowing that you're going to be on the periphery, and if something should go wrong, you will be caught in the after effects or into the effects of that demonstration, whether you're stuck in a traffic jam, whether you're on the street, on the periphery of it. What are some, being not a part of the demonstration, but being caught up in its ripple effect? What are
Well,
some steps that you can take to ahead of time or on the spot uh, to ensure or up your survivability factor?
first of all, we should not be there at all, just to avoid. Usually, local news tells you quite often and quite detailed where that riots or strikes actually take place. Usually city centers or government centers with different local government buildings or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just try to do your best to avoid such places. And what I should underline is that a very, very common mistake of a good citizen is the thought pattern as follows: I do nothing, I am a good citizen, that's why they will
Touch
never
me.
touch me. That is completely wrong, because during riots, all government forces, be it police or military or anything else, they have protocols. And
Yep.
if they find you suspicious, they will pack you, of course, with everyone else, and they will never investigate your guilt immediately. They will pack you, they will get you to the station, police station, for example. Then they will interrogate you and all that stuff. If you are innocent and if you are a good citizen, they of course will find out that you are a good citizen. But you will
Mm-hmm.
just waste 4 or 6 hours of your time. You will waste your uh, nerves, you will waste your mood, you will waste your, well, anything. And yes, of course, they will find out that you are innocent, but no one will return that time. So just do not be in such places. And
Hmm.
do not argue with law enforcement officers there, because they have protocol, and according to it, they are not obliged to listen to you.
Hmm.
They have a protocol. They are obliged to take you to their bus. That is all.
Yep.
And
I think
and
another
the,
point.
and the guy who is obliged to listen to you is in the police station.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not present
Yeah, he is
on
not present
ground.
on the scene.
Yeah. No, that's a valid point. I think another element to add in is
Unfortunately,
the current timeline.
I had quite many of these kind of cases, and in some of them, I even had to use well, my reputation and my connections in the law enforcement world just to get some guys out of the station, just because they are stupid. They are stupid citizens, and they thought that if they are innocent, no one would touch them.
Yeah. Yep. If you're on the periphery, you're involved.
Yeah, of course.
Assume as much.
Yeah,
I think another element that we should probably mention is the current timeline. I mean, we're living in a pandemic, in a global crisis. So, I mean, the easy thing to say would be wear a mask, maintain social distancing, but those are kind of moot points in a demonstration. I think the element to more factor in is that because we're in a pandemic and a global crisis, people are far more lit up. They're far more heated. The tolerance levels are far lower. The explosive boiling point is far shorter, and you're going to be in the midst of a pack mentality where one person's explosiveness can reverberate. It becomes catchy. So the potential for an event to get out of hand these days, especially, is exponentially greater than it would have been at other times or for other circumstances. People are short fused. They're often at the extent, at least here in this region, they're at the extent of their financial capacity. So these things can unravel very quickly. When we hear that there are protests on the news, or um, we know we have to go to a city, we will avoid government buildings, the presidential house, the tax office, all of these different elements, knowing that they are already assumed to be explosively charged places for the public at this point. And like you said, a lot of these things will be advertised on the news or on social media. You'll hear about them. Some not, some you have to look for, but you can't generate people person by person en masse. So, I mean, generally, you're going to hear about it on some form of media, whether it be social or the actual news. So, you'll have some prior prep. Now, there are some circumstances where uh, you may get caught. You've made a tactical mistake, or you went down the wrong road, or you ended up in the wrong place by some misfortune of your own misplanning or poor planning. So, I mean, what are some small things that you can do to up your safety factor in that vein, do
first
you
of
think?
all, let me agree with you. Without bragging, even me, sometimes I found myself just in the middle of a riot that suddenly appeared in a region that was not supposed to be the center of it. So I can relate that. Be aware anytime.
Yep.
So first of all, the best option is to wait until the wave of the protest will move somewhere else.
Mhm.
And I should warn about two major mistakes. Never go with the flow on the first, is the first one. Uh, you can contradict that many guys who teach people how to survive catastrophes, they advise following the flow because it is easier. It's not that case, guys.
Mhm.
If you follow the flow, you will find yourself in the center of the big crowd, and your chances of escape from there will be very low, just because of the amount of people and just because you are already circled by the law enforcement guys. And
Yep.
then please refer to point one. They will, of course, know that you are innocent, but many hours later.
I always advise to stick to the periphery.
Uh,
Uh,
it is not, sometimes it is not very possible.
no,
So if we are dealing with that protest riot flow or crowd, never go with it and never go against it, because just you cannot go against a great amount of people.
the idea
So
for me that sticking to the periphery is the idea that be aware of outlying stores, side streets, and covers should you need them in a pinch to get
yeah,
off of the flow,
in
not
this
to
case,
buck the flow or go with the flow, but to
this case agree.
uh,
The first place you see to step aside and just wait. Yes, it can be a
yeah,
shop, it can be a parlor, it can be some side street or something like that. And just don't move. Uh, just be patient and wait.
yeah.
And
It's
wait,
I always tell people not to go away from the flow or with the flow, but to cut it out, to break away from the flow entirely.
yeah. And one major thing is wait until the flow is gone completely.
Yep.
Because the fact is that if you see that the main crowd passed you already, you can think that everything now is okay and you can go. You cannot, basically, because it is that very moment when law enforcement guys start to look for those who run away.
Mhm.
So just stand still and be patient. If you are
Yep. Be
not moving, you are,
stationary.
yeah, be stationary. If you are not moving, you are safe.
Yep.
Just like with the just like in the Predator movie.
Yeah. Exactly. Find a place, and if it's safe, stick to it through the duration until the major problem has subsided.
Yeah.
Another thing that I always say is don't, if at all possible, don't find yourself in the main event should a riot break out. The
Definitely.
police, the police attention, the possibility of getting caught on video and being a byproduct of the main event, and being assumed to be one of the main provocateurs, um, legal cases, increased chance of injury and death, and minimal chance of escape at that point. I mean, obviously, like you said, that's not always possible. Um, but to know where the main event is within that demonstration has a lot of value. And oftentimes you can see what's developing in terms of aggression, and um, groups of people that are far more exasperated than others. Hello?
Yep. I actually cannot add anything else to it.
I think, don't you think, as an aside, this is the perfect time to be forced to wear a mask?
Well,
I noticed during a lot of the protests here that
I'm
identity
skeptical
is
about
totally
the
covered.
masks. Mm, to be straight, the mask do not cover your identity. it just help. It just prevent law enforcement guys to find out who you are immediately.
Yeah, but in a
Because
big enough demonstration,
basically, if we are talking about the face recognition pattern used in the majority of the countries, it is the points, the so-called uh, pentagon of the points of reference. There are 5 points of recognition, and mask hides only 2 of them. So, well,
but if there's enough people, it can be a blending tool.
yep, it can be a blending tool again, but well, but it also increases your chances of being kept by the law enforcement guys,
mhm. Yeah.
especially if
I noticed in some countries where they don't have, like here, some countries don't have high levels of technology. And when you see some of the demonstrations that have taken place in Latin America here, the masks are kind of used as an identity protector when that kind of technology isn't available or the mass size of the demonstration is such that you get lost in the shuffle. That mask can be a temporary um, identity cover to allow escape rapidly should one need it. There's always the risk that, yeah, later on, technology can discover. But for the time being, if the greater threat is the manifestation itself, or violence, or being caught in social unrest, it can also help those on the periphery that aren't part of it, was a point that I was planning on making. Not that you're an active participant in the demonstration, but the mask can prevent you from being seen as one until a later on date where things have calmed down anyways, noting that law enforcement will also be fairly jacked at the moment.
agree.
What would you bring with you if you were planning on intentionally going to a demonstration, knowing that it could be
Why
an
am I going intentionally to the demonstration? Could you please specify a bit, because it impacts significantly what I will take with me.
that was kind of the point originally that I was trying to make, was why I think it needs to be clearly defined why you're going. But why ever you're going, if you know that it can potentially get out of control, even if you're going for very moral or supportive reasons, it pays to prepare and bring a day bag with you, knowing that this could be an all day event and you could be split from people that you know in an unfamiliar territory with no way of getting back home.
It's a tricky thing, because going to this kind of stuff, you should consider being taken by the law enforcement guys. And the law enforcement guys are notorious of taking your shit out of you when you are in the police station.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be straight, they do it.
So
Especially
let's say,
in the third world countries.
mm-hmm,
So on the one hand, yes, it's a daily bag. On the other hand, try not to take too many things, and especially some kind of valuable ones. And in these terms, valuable things, valuable is everything that could be sold, starting with
mm-hmm,
flashlights, ending with uh, lunchbox that you made this morning.
mm-hmm.
So
I
it's
for mine,
you should balance between the necessity and between the possibility of being caught.
what I do is plan for the necessities that I'm going to need for an extended period of time, should I be going, and keeping that in mind, making sure that they're okay to be lost.
Yeah,
Um, Things
it's
like
like,
energy bars, ample
yeah,
supply of water, a second, change of shit clothing that's low cost or lacking in value. A secondary charger for your cell, for instance. Some basic first aid kit with things that aren't particularly expensive. A rain jacket, change for a payphone, some sunscreen. Um, in your wallet, you can keep a list of emergency or important phone numbers, including your lawyer. Having that on you is invaluable and doesn't incriminate you in any way if it's put innocuously into your address book. Um, so, I mean, those are things that I can lose. They're not going to throw me off if I lose them. They're also not going to incriminate me from being in the midst of anything or having an ulterior motive by being there. Um, it's a general day bug out bag that is extremely low cost and innocuous.
yeah, I agree again.
Okay. Um, I mean, some other things too. I wanted to bring up. Bring small bills. If you need cash along the way and can't find an ATM or stopping at an ATM is potentially dangerous with varied and diverse groups around you. Bring some small bills, bring change for sudden necessary requirements, whether it's a taxi, an Uber, a Lyft, a payphone to buy some water or cheap food along the way. Here, sometimes in the middle of protests, people will charge for usage of a bathroom. So, where you're not a patron, at least. Um, so, I mean, those are things, and here, anything higher than an American 20 will not be accepted. And in the middle of a protest or demonstration, less so. So, I mean, those are some general things that in a pinch, assuming you may be in a pinch, and one should always assume they may potentially be in a pinch if they're going to these events, that are very simple to bring with you, yet most people don't think of whatsoever.
Yep.
Even an app, like if you've downloaded, if you're not familiar with the area you're in, downloading an app like Waze or Google Maps on your phone, or even having a general GPS or something like Maps.me, uh, gives you escape routes. It gives you clarity of the overview of where you're going to be if it's not completely clear based on the volume of people there or the area being unfamiliar. It'll show you bus routes. It'll show you cover. It'll show you rides where you can access entry points for law enforcement or bad agents that could be attending the event. So, I mean, even those little innocuous things prepare you for where you're going, and they don't take a lot of time to do. It gives you a general overlay of the area. It's like having a blueprint of where you're going ahead of time. So, I mean, those little apps are free to download, and yet I've found even making my way around here, they're invaluable. They give micro details on things that are coming up, blockages, protests, police stops, whatever the case may be.
Yep. But in this particular case, we cannot completely avoid being tracked in this or
No,
that way. So I can say that we should not be very paranoid about it.
no, paranoid, no. But just to give you, for me, I like to know where I'm going. And I
Yeah,
like to know
of
the
course.
surrounding area of where I'm in
Yeah,
and
agree.
what's ahead of me so that I can just be generally prepared for it. Here, knowing that there's a police stop up ahead allows me to change direction, knowing that it could be a bribe stop at this point, for instance, knowing that that's happening a lot in the country. So, I mean, just any kind of pre event prep helps.
Yep.
What else? What else can you add to that? Comfortable shoes. Can't run in high heels or work boots.
Just, I would say, just comfortable. Because I personally met girls who felt more comfortable on high heels than in sneakers. So,
Well, yeah, it depends on the person, obviously.
so just up to you.
I just
For
just something that
example,
allows.
if we are talking about personally me, I feel I feel comfortable wearing sneakers, and I feel comfortable wearing jumping boots of the military style.
Mhm,
These are just two different kinds of comfortability.
mhm. Just generally something that allows for quick escape or quick directional
Yeah,
changes.
that
Breaking
you,
your ankle is not a good idea in the middle of a riot.
yeah,
And I think another thing that people often forget, and I know you'll back me on this one, if things do get out of hand, breathe, stay calm. I mean, panic never gave anyone the right decisions, and calm minds solve problems. So I mean, keep your wits about you, and I mean, allow yourself the time to make the correct decisions. I think is an important thing to mention as well. Hello?
yep.
Yeah. Those
So,
are. I mean, go ahead.
yep. Um, I just actually was not intending to say anything to interrupt you.
Oh, okay. No,
It
I'm
was
I'm done.
just, well, a pause filler, like go, not to be completely silent.
Yeah. No, understood. No, but I think noting the tone of the demonstration. I mean, we're even seeing, I mean, the demonstrations and the protests that we're seeing in the States for defunding the police. And I'm not going to get into this because I have no intention of getting into American politics or having any backlash on the video. But even noting that whatever the case may be, whether it's systemic racism, where it's anti-government sentiment, whether it's defunding police, noting that the people that attend are already more jacked than they would have been just because of the reason that they're there. Uh, the pandemic has caused an inordinate amount of tension and stress and anger and frustration that just needs a reason to boil over. So knowing that going in, that whatever the reason for the demonstration or the protest, you're going to have people that are very frustrated there already, and likely not nearly only because of the reason that they're there, is a major thing to start learning to read the crowd and understand what's happening around you. Um, and like you said, I mean, the best thing is to stay home. If you know there's going to be a demonstration and it could devolve into something more serious by the end of the day, stay home, avoid it. You've already been given all the information that you need that it's happening. And if you're a big believer in whatever cause is happening in that demonstration or protest, there are probably other safer ways, considering the volatility that could be there, considering that we're in the midst of a pandemic, considering that there is a certain health risk of you going, that you can demonstrate that support apart from being in a protest.
Yeah, and that's why I underlined from the very beginning that I do not I'm not now giving advice to those who are eager to protest.
Yeah,
Otherwise, well, I'm not paid well enough to
I'm
give
not
such
paid enough.
advice. Yeah, this information
Yeah, for sure.
actually is very, very valuable.
I was going to add another thing too that you'll probably want to jump in on. You, and I don't mean you in particular, I mean everyone is always welcome to share whatever they like online on social media. It is at the end of the day your prerogative.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I get arguments on that all the time. I can share whatever the fuck I want on my timeline. Yeah, you can. Absolutely. It is your timeline, your decisions, your fingers that do the typing. But note that not only do you run the risk of adding to the time bomb of emotions if you spew venomous opinion, but with current data mining and information gathering and profile building and false flags and intentional propaganda and wag the dog and all of these things, your words and opinions that are politically explosive or talking about a protest or demonstration can help build much bigger databases that can be utilized negatively by people above you or propaganda agents to spread hate, divide, separation, and destabilization by strategic powers, or just to build profiles. So while I give opinions on Facebook, I give opinions that are generally very controlled, uh, not particularly explosive. Uh, so during times where things are high and heated and have very explosive and combustible emotion, um, be careful what you post. It will be if they find out your identity at a protest as somebody that's been extremely volatile, or even somebody that's innocent or was caught in the rush. Like you said, one of the downfalls is that you go to the police station and waste 4 to 6 hours of your time until they find out you're innocent. Or the other
Yeah.
end of the spectrum is that you are innocent and they do a quick search on your profile on various social media outlets and find that you are a provocateur there, even though you may not have been at the protest itself. And then you have uh, false containment or misidentity of what your reason for being there is. So I'm very careful what I post on social media when it comes to politics or religion or sides. Any kind of provocative sides that people are on now, those tribal divides that we see so often, especially in North America. I try and avoid those topics entirely online. I don't want a trail of breadcrumbs.
And this, there is also a psychological thing to it. If you are feeling involved in different political, even political discussions, even if you are neutral, sooner or later you occasionally will take part, either for or against something. It's just, well, it happens psychologically if you are
Mm-hmm.
involved. I know that it is quite a difficult thing to keep neutrality, but the funny thing is that you will never keep it forever.
Expand on some examples on that. That's an interesting idea, if
Uh,
you could.
uh, well, I can, I, if I start naming these kind of examples, it will take forever.
No, just some ideas on general examples on what to avoid. You mean
Uh,
avoiding political talk, avoiding
Political
being,
discussions, political talks.
yeah.
If you want to be neutral, you should listen but not talk, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
Analyze sources, analyze mass media, analyze everything, but not discuss. Do not please discuss it too much. Well, you can
Yeah.
discuss politics, for example, but not too much, and never try to uh, never try to make your partner or opponent in that political talk. Do not impose your ideas.
Yeah.
Do not fight for it because that's what they are doing. And
Mm-hmm.
if you once involved in it, sooner or later you will find yourself in some kind of a riot, waving some kind of a flag.
Yep. Yep. Um,
So for me
I,
personally, neutrality is avoiding these kind of conversations,
mhm.
and
Yeah, I would agree with
uh,
that.
and I should warn that it is that sometimes it could be very very difficult.
On that note, just expanding a little bit on that, um, note that even during public demonstrations or protests that are in the name of peace, or for positive reasoning, note that modern media, wherever it is, will generally put an agenda spin or wag the dog on everything. We see it daily. So, I mean, it's not a shock to people to, oh, what are you saying about our media? I mean, we seem to
Yeah,
be universally in agreement on that. So take your feedback and input from various sources. Um, if I'm curious about something that's happening, about unrest in a country, I talk to people on the ground, people
yeah,
that have input firsthand into what is actually happening, that have nothing to gain by telling me something different than what is happening. Um, I don't go by media hyperbole that tells me, oh, in Belarus, I'll call Oleg, and that will be my source far sooner than any kind of a media outlet will be. And the
yeah,
more informed you are,
and I'm twice as valuable for you
yeah, exactly.
because I'm an expat, and
Yeah.
if you want to know the real state of things in the country, ask expat, because expats usually see more things than locals.
And I think they're far more unbiased with what's happening.
Yeah,
They
definitely.
have a far more neutral middle ground
Yeah,
perspective from what they see because they simply don't have the emotional investment that locals
yeah,
and nationals do.
and on a lighter note, and that's how our discussions turns into reconnaissance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I always used to get attempted to be dragged into here they have two uh, football teams that are a major rival in the country. They have Saprissa and they have Alajuela.
Yeah, I
Both
know
sides
them.
hate each other and they cannot sit together during games. So I mean, my father-in-law, when he was alive, always used to tell me, I mean, you have to pick one side or the other. I mean, you have to be on one side or the other. You have to pick one team and run with it, and know that it will affect our relationship, your decision on that team. And I went, oh no, I mean, you're not going to dovetail me into a two choice discussion. I have no input or value in the game. I'm Canadian. I like hockey.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit about either of your teams. And he was like, somehow, even though I gave you two choices, you managed to ostracize yourself even by picking the third choice. I was like, yeah, well, welcome to my world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, that's a great point. Expats have, and it depends on the expat too. I mean, here, like I've been telling you, I mean, if you're one of those expats that lives in a very isolated community, that has no finger on the pulse of nationalism and never leaves your compound and gets only English speaking news and doesn't interact with the locals. I've seen a lot of information spewing from expats that's totally inaccurate on social media because they simply haven't invested the time in the country to know what's really happening. They have a peripheral view from um, somebody who's just here killing time or retirees or simply here for business reasons or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, you have to be careful on the expat input as well.
Oh, of course.
Generally, those expats that have invested and put themselves into the regular community that have been living here apart from security and without a safety net, I would fully agree with you. They have a far greater finger on the pulse with far less influence in those viewpoints.
Yep. And talking about riots, again, just make simple precautions regarding the uh, non non-physical consequences of those riots, right? Like, for example, jumping currency rates,
Yep.
or, well, even outages like electricity outages because the rioters damaged something. Just to be prepared, keeping some money in cash, in stable currency in that region, or one of the stable currencies, just to be prepared and never panic, because post-riot events like currency jumps and so on and so forth are usually mitigated very quickly. So it's just a matter of week or two wait until everything is stabilized.
Yep. Also note the reason why certain strikes are happening and be prepared to react to the byproduct of that. We had some unrest a couple of years ago with a number of different strikes. Um, the taxi strike. So people were loading up on Uber. So if you're reliant on Uber, make sure that you know that there's going to be exponentially more time to get an Uber on time if you have timed appointments or work or things like that. Some of the more greater ones were that we had the propane companies, the gas companies, and gasolineras, the gas stations that were going on strike because there was a resource shortage. So I mean, when you have uh, all the cooking you do is connected to a propane stove or an oven that requires a propane tank, or there's a gasoline shortage coming up, you need to react quick here. And you need to go fill your car, you need to go fill your tank, or it can drastically affect your life for the duration of that strike. And sometimes these strikes here, at least in the third world, can last upwards of 2 to 3 weeks, which means that you don't have accessibility to uh, gasoline or propane or whatever that resource is at that time, movement accessibility if you don't have a car and it's a taxi strike, um, for an extended period of time. So to stay on top of those things and note that they can very drastically affect your day to day, even if you rarely leave home, is something that you need to be aware of here. Whereas in North America, you usually do not. Comments?
Uh, Agreed, even geographically, cause once I've been in the region that could take its gasoline supplies only by sea,
Mm-hmm.
and that way was closed by a neighboring country because of something happened there,
Yep.
and that region was short of gasoline for a couple of months, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So even geographical kind of stuff matters here.
Yeah.
And
Here as
anyway,
well.
if you are living in a country or in a city, well, it's just a common thing to know how things are happening here in terms of supplies, in terms of how the process works, and etc.
Here too, we had a number of semis with uh, that had trailers full of food products that were halted at the border of Costa Rica and Nicaragua for uh, a lengthy period of time. So I mean, it doesn't stop or lower the potential for food shortage, but there are specific foods that you no longer have accessibility to if the rivaling government is preventing entry for things that you've ordered from a third party. And we had that here where these trailers were held up at the border for an extended period of time. So that affects the grocery stores and the meat markets and the fresh markets for vegetables and fruit. it can have a domino or rippling effect down the line of being able to put out product. So, I mean, it's not enough to make you go hungry, but it's definitely enough to force you to change some habits or have some restrictions on some foods that you've become accustomed to. And
Yeah,
that can become grander scale over time too. If it can happen with those certain foods, it can generally happen with a lot of others too.
with everything. Yep. One more example of that common awareness is, well, I think my example is very good. I'm living in in Belarus. It's a quite stable country, and I'm living in the capital of it. So the water supply of that capital can be, uh, it is actually of two sources, dependent on the district of the city. It is either underground rivers or a huge artificial lake created for this very reason.
Mm.
I'm living in the region that gets water from that artificial lake. And knowing our climate, we can have quite significant hot days in summer suddenly. And the bacteria in that artificial lake, of course, they start spreading, and the facilities use more powers to disinfect the water. As a result, it happens that during the summer, for some weeks, our water smells like apothecary or drugstore.
Understood.
Well, it is quite usable. You can drink it. You can the smell is the only thing.
Mhm.
It is no harm to the health, but I still keep every summer I buy some bottles or great kegs of water just in case.
Water sources can also be tampered with as well. I mean, so it
Yeah, and
pays to have
especially
bottled
now
water.
I have a small baby, so
Exactly.
that smelling water is a no option
Yeah.
for it. So yep, it's as simple as this. You should not be living in some African country in the middle of the desert to know how the water supply works,
Yep.
and it can be crucial anytime.
Yep. We always make sure that we have bottled water inside the house should something happen, whether that water is polluted via flash flood or tampered with by uh, bad acting
Yeah,
agents or whatever the case may be. And another thing I was going to add to that you brought up a very valid point is that here, right now, you have to be very careful about how much electricity, how much water, um, how much technology you're using because companies and government owned entities are taking advantage. They've already established and take the hint from that. When a government says they're getting low on money and they can't help you out and they're running out of cash and they're hitting a point of desperation, they're going to utilize certain methods to regain some of that money. And if it's going to be met with immense discontent to bring up taxes, for instance, they'll find different ways of taking that money. So, I mean, people around here have found huge electricity and water bills that they didn't prepare for at all
yeah, of
as
course.
price fixing and price jacking has become an issue. And I mean, you may eventually win that argument, but it's not going to be in the time being. That's going to be a long term prognosis to get that money back if you don't want those services shut off. So, I mean, you have to be very careful how much light, how much water, things like that, that generally first world nations take for granted. Because as the government gets desperate, they start collecting money how they know how to, or how they're able to. and so do companies that have a fixed prices generally. Those prices you have to pay very attention to as time progresses. So, I mean, we have tried to be very cautious on the times and the length and the amount that we're utilizing some of these resources, knowing that that could happen to almost anybody and has to a number of people in our neighborhood already.
Also agree, though it's not quite the case in where I live, but it's legit, and especially if you are going to live in some interesting places of the third world, it should we should consider it. We should take it into account.
Desperate times call for desperate attempts from desperate
Yeah,
people. So I think that has to be adhered to all the time.
the most desperate people in these cases, in these cases, is usually the government.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, it's like the airport here being opened on August 2nd. I mean,
yeah,
lots of people are super excited about it, but I mean, when you actually do a case profile on the bilateral things that are happening around that airport opening, I mean, it's not. I mean, we're not changing our course in any way because of that. I mean, there's little room for excitement. I mean, if anything, you may get lucky, and as a tourist industry operator, you may get supplementary income. But I mean, there are far too many factors that prevent any kind of mass reopening. That it's more, how should I put it? I've posted this on Facebook too. That it's a decorative or symbolic
yeah, of
announcement
course.
to get big business and industry sectors off the government's back temporarily and give them a respite so they can start making different plans on how this is all going to work without that pressure. Because the
Of
airport
course.
opening doesn't change a whole lot at this point.
But we should understand the government as well.
Yeah, I think that
Every
pays.
option is valuable here.
Yeah.
And talking about government, here we have an interesting case how government easily gets money from the foreigners.
Continue.
Now here we have, of course, we have fines for different administrative things, like for example, crossing the road in the wrong way, in the wrong place, or some missing the semaphore or something like that.
Yeah.
So, for example, taking a ride in the bus without a ticket, no, all these kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But but the laws do not operate with exact numbers here. Like for this kind of stuff, the fine should be this. No, it's always a range.
And they determine the range, or what's the range based on?
The range is based on, well, different factors, but it is the range from and to. It is based on the severity of the whether you did it only once or you have already did this kind of stuff or something like that. But in case you are a foreigner, the government usually considers you being a rich person, and
Here too.
regardless of the severity of your so-called misdemeanor, they will fine you to the highest possible rate inside this range.
Yep. No, that often happens here too.
And I again, as an expat, I am very accurate here because I know that my fine would be twice or thrice higher than the local one's one for the same kind
Yep.
of misdemeanor.
Yeah. No, here there's that discrepancy as well. Um, the thing is, you never know until the time comes what that discrepancy is going to be. So you have to be ultra aware of not getting in
Exactly.
that discrepancy in the first place.
Yep, I can relate.
So, I mean, we did a seminar a little while back, myself and a local firearms instructor, to people in a certain area here that's known for expats that had a series of home burglaries. And I noticed they did about 12 different things to draw attention that was completely unnecessary. And B, every time we tried to find a way to rectify it, they would find a counter argument that justified their decisions to um, stay doing the exact same thing. And when you're drawing unnecessary attention to yourself regularly and refuse to acknowledge it, I mean, our conclusion to the work uh, to the workshop was, okay, best of luck. Uh, I hope by God's grace you aren't the next one that's robbed, and if you are, um, happy trails to the medical bill. I don't really know what else to say. I mean, expats are here at least notoriously resilient to understanding the fact that they have a target on their back. Um,
I guess it's the
I, I
majority.
had I had a friend here from the States who had been mugged 8 times in 7 years of living here. And his idea was, I was fucking ticos. I mean, they just take an opportunity with somebody vulnerable when they see it. And my response to him was, if you've been mugged 8 times, 8 times, it's you. It's not them. It's you. I would
Yeah,
take a close evaluation of what it is that's drawing attention to them from you and start making personal changes. That's what we call that external locus of control, where everybody else is to blame for my suffering. And man, if you've been mugged 8 times, you are doing something wrong.
yeah. It's primarily it's our fault.
Yeah, I mean, and he did not want to hear that at all. So, I mean, if if you're living in that kind of delusional world, there's very little that can be done for you to understand that you stand out and it's inevitable. So, I mean, if you don't believe there's a gray man out there, how can you possibly understand that there's a gray man theory to go along with it?
Yep.
It's
And we
it's
are
the
returning
equivalent
to
of
our
no,
topic about gravemen,
be pink,
not gravemanship.
be pink. Go ahead. I don't mind. It's not my life.
Was it? To be straight, I like more another your quotation.
Which
Uh, we should not necessarily need to be gray, but at least try not to be acid orange.
yeah. Yeah, I use that one a lot to make people understand. I mean, clearly it's a theory that's lost on some people, so you have to pound it home in a more transparent way. Anyways, we're hitting the level here. Is there anything that you want to finish up with from your experience?
Well, nothing in particular from my part. Thank you so much. It was very interesting.
No, we'll be back. It's good to get back into the rhythm.
Yeah,
We had a clash
definitely.
of time periods for about a month there, but hopefully we can start doing this as a weekly pod again and get back into some rhythm. For those that listen, um, it's greatly appreciated. These are not easy topics to discuss or figure out. So Oleg and I both try and put them in a context that average people can relate to um, in the easiest manner and give them at least some food for thought so that they can relate it to their personal circumstances instead of giving some universal how-to book. So I'll personally leave it on that. Um, as always, it's a pleasure. Um,
Uh, Likewise.
and we'll try and come back with a new topic next week. Hopefully, we can line something up. And
hopefully, yep. At least after the moving, I have internet. I established my connections with all that funny guys that I told you about in private messages.
Yeah.
So it's a great place, actually.
Now you like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Strategically.
Yeah. And communication is the key.
Always. Yeah, and you get to dictate how that communication is absorbed, which makes it even more beneficial.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right, be safe, brother. Let's keep talking during the week.
You too.
And we'll be back shortly. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
See ya.